Ukraine's intel chief has revealed the stunning capacity of Russia to absorb losses. Just how can Ukraine keep up the fight in the face of Russian industrial might? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get to the bottom of it. Okay, so this is kind of the leading story here that I want to talk about. This is an interview, actually, I believe it initially came in the Wall Street Journal, today's edition, and it is the Ukrainian intel chief who acknowledges that Russia can mobilize up to 30,000 troops monthly. And what's so stunning about that number, to put it in perspective, means that Russia can have an Avdiivka grade level of losses every 2 weeks. Right? The generally accepted number is about 16,000 Russian casualties is what they took in Avdiivka. In fact, the best validation for this is that a prominent Russian mill blogger allegedly unalived himself when he posted the losses, the real Russian losses in Avdiivka. 16,000, this says 16,000 KIA'd and 300 armored vehicles lost. And apparently he was then threatened by the commander of the Russian 4th Motor Rifle Brigade, and then mysteriously passed away. So to me, that says that somebody leaked true information that they weren't going to, right? Because Russia maintains that its losses were very low in Avdiivka. It still to this day maintains there's only a few thousand losses in the Ukraine conflict in general. But the reality seems to be, and again, U.S. intel backs this up, that Russian losses are much more staggering. And what's troubling about this is, if this data is right, if we're looking at 16,000 KIA, which is, and let's say there's usually, for every one KIA, there's 2 WIA, roughly. So we're looking at about 45,000, a little more, we'll say 50,000 troops. That means Russia can lose an Avdiivka every 60 days, basically, which is insane, right? And still replace its losses. And so the question that you're left with then is that how can Ukraine achieve victory? Right. And here's the thing. A lot of people are asking that question because according to recent poll data, only 10% of Europeans believe Ukraine can win the war at all. Or 20% of respondents said they thought Russia would win the war. Now, here's the thing, right? The reality is that, here we go, and it shows up here, 37% said across 12 countries said a compromise settlement was the most likely outcome. Absolutely, this is correct. But here's the thing, guys. This was almost always going to be the deal, right? Like, it's very rare that you see a total victory for one side. And usually that only happens when one of the belligerents has been fought to literal or political exhaustion. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. Right? In the Vietnam War, the U.S. was fought to exhaustion. Politically, it lost the will to continue the fight, and it left. There was maybe something written on a peace treaty, but it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. And the North Vietnamese knew that. And so that enabled them to achieve a total victory, right? Another example would be the First World War. That was a total victory in which Germany basically had reached total exhaustion as a country and was forced to accept really awful terms of surrender, right? They had no choice. The terms were dictated to them. So, but what about the majority of wars in human history, right? And the answer is that all of those end in some kind of compromise settlement, right? Look, for example, at the first Gulf War, right? The U.S. kicked the Iraqis out of Kuwait, but what we didn't do is, overturn the entire Iraqi state or demand that Saddam leave, right? There was a middle ground solution. Even though it was militarily a one-sided thrashing, right? There was still a negotiated settlement where Saddam was at least allowed to stay in power and enabled, and even was allowed to maintain a certain level of military readiness. So that, I think, is the most likely outcome, right? Because you have to understand that, but that was always the case, guys. I don't know what else to tell you. That was always the case. Russia has about 500,000 soldiers supporting the Ukraine operation, either in Ukraine or in the immediate area. So, but we've seen their equipping is really poor. actually. Their equipping really leaves a lot to be desired. And that, I think, is Ukraine's best strategy, is to go in from two prongs. The first is to inflict losses, not so much to degrade the Russian military, but to degrade the political establishment. Because again, every time you pull in 30,000 new troops and then you have them become wounded or killed, you attrit the political will of the Russian government to keep fighting. Remember, we've seen Putin won't do a full mobilization because he believes that the Russian people won't support that act politically, which means that the Russian people are still, despite Russia not being a democracy in any meaningful sense, the Russian people still have the final say over policies. And by damaging the political will of Russia to fight, you are in effect damaging their political base. Think of it like that. The other prong is their industrial base. We've seen in combat footage that Russian forces are having worse and worse gear. At this point, some of the combat footage I've seen most recently, and it's over on Combat Vet News, if you're a member, you know what I'm talking about, where a lot of these Russian military members, they don't have helmets. They appear to be wearing civilian clothing. They often have civilian backpacks. They are using Soviet-era surplus weapons with, as far as I can tell, little to no optics. And they appear at times to have little to no training or real command and control. And so that, to me, indicates that the industrial base of Russia does not have the capacity to meaningfully equip 30,000 troops, that their equipping is going worse and worse and worse and worse, right? And you are seeing, yes, you can put 30,000 troops in combat. They probably will all have weapons, but they won't have much more beyond that. And Russia relies on its technology, just as Ukraine does, right? FPV drones, radio, electronic warfare stuff. And the more that gets attrited down, the less effective the Russian armed forces are going to fight. They already struggle, despite having these great number of people, they already struggle to engage in meaningful offensive action, right? Taking the town of Avdiivka took the better part of 6 months, and it still hasn't resulted in some stunning breakthrough. The Ukrainians are just a few hundred meters westward and are still ready to fight the Russians. So I say that as a reminder to everyone, but a lot of people sit there and go, well, if you can't win everything, you might as well lose, right? That's like an Olympic sprinter being like, well, I'm not even going to go to the Olympics this year because I definitely can't win gold, right? My best time ever in training has not come close to, the top sprinter of the world. So I'm not even going to show up. And it's like, that's stupid. That doesn't make any sense, right? And especially, or a better example would be somebody who says, well, I can't get $1 billion for my startup, so I'm not even going to sell it. And it's like, bro, I'm not even going to try to make my startup better. And it's like, bro, I'm sorry. Everyone wishes they could get $1 billion, right? Just like we all wish we could see Russia kicked out of Ukraine and out of Crimea, but it's not going to happen. Or at least not without a stunning change in the Russian political environment. But that doesn't mean that every Russian that Ukraine KIAs, that doesn't mean that every Russian vehicle they destroy, that every ounce of territory Russia can't take, that's going to put Ukraine in a more even footing at the negotiating table, right? And the whole idea is to sit there and be like, maybe the negotiations, if Russia really feels desperate, really feels the heat, maybe they'll sit there and say, listen, all we want is a guarantee that you won't join NATO, right? Or all we want, and we'll withdraw from territory. Or hey, we'll give you back all the territory but the original Donbas region that was been separatist for years. Those are right. That wouldn't be a total victory, but we can all agree that given the state of the war currently, that sort of negotiated settlement would be, a 90-10 Ukrainian victory. Does that make sense? So anyway, guys, if you feel like you need an extra boost to achieve your victories, again, I'm trying to make these transitions make sense. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but you do need Strike Gum, right? You need the zero sugar, 90 milligrams of caffeine, 100 milligrams of alpha. This is the energy drink alternative. And I'm just going to point out that last year, in the first production run, we donated like over $5,000 to Ukrainian charities that benefit civilians. I'm just going to ask you, let me know in the comments if you know a Ukrainian, say group, a group of Ukrainians doing something that might need a hand, might need some donations. And maybe I'll pick one or two of them, and we'll try to let the proceeds from Strike Gum this year help them out. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you have any ideas. That's all I got. Of course, huge thank you to the Colonel tier members of combatvetnews.com, the Lieutenant tier members. Hit like and subscribe. Please tell the YouTube algorithm that I make good content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.